Hey, it's Monday, January 26th. I'm Deirdre Bosa with another CNBC live stream here. We discuss all things AI and the China catching up narrative. It just got a lot more interesting. A top ranking Chinese AI startup, Jipu AI, has had to limit access to its coding agents after just overwhelming demand. The most striking detail, Jipu says that the user base for its coding plan is primarily concentrated in China and the US. I repeat, the United States, a Chinese model having a viral coding moment right here. That is a big deal because coding is the key battleground in AI. It's the first place models turn into daily tools and where agents do real work. It's where Anthropic's Claude Code is creating all the buzz in AI right now with Cowork and Claude and Excel, something we demoed today in regular programming. So like DeepSeek before it, Jipu was largely unknown here until recently, but in just the last few weeks, there's a lot that's happened at this company. It should be on your radar. It has gone public in Hong Kong. It's released a major new model, which it says was trained entirely on Huawei chips. So those are Chinese chips. And now it's GLM 4.7 coding assistant. It's gaining traction globally. My producer Jasmine and I, we've been getting our hands dirty with new AI tools over the last few weeks in particular. So naturally, we tried out Jipu's and it just worked like some of the other ones we've been using. With just one prompt we're going to show you, we were able to make an app that tracks the top public companies in Hong Kong by market cap. We asked it to give notifications when the list changes. So similar to the apps we were spinning up on Replit and Claude the week prior, which is kind of like a wow moment for us to see that it's actually becoming quite commoditized. That does lead us to this bigger question, though, that I feel like people have been asking for a year now. Was DeepSeek a blip or a sign of more of what's to come from Chinese labs? Today, Alibaba dropped Qwen 3 Max, thinking that's its latest flagship reasoning model, competitive with the latest models from OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, across those different third-party benchmarks. Now, one of the builders testing Jipu and other Chinese models against American frontier models is Tuan Srivastava of Base 10, a platform that sits underneath AI applications and sees real-world model usage across enterprises. Now, that matters even more now because Base 10 just raised a new round with NVIDIA participating, a signal that it's plugged into real large-scale AI workloads. Tuan, thank you for making the time to be with us today. I know it's been a busy few days of travel.
Yeah, thanks, Deirdre. Thanks for having me, and always excited to chat with you.
Do we have Tuan or do we have him on mute? Oh, I got you. It's me, Tuan. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's start really broad. You can hear me, right? Double checking.
I can hear you great.
Okay, it was my problem. I couldn't hear you, but now I do. Let's start really broad. As I've been saying, myself and Jasmine, we've been playing around on sort of like anything we can get our hands on and understand as non-technical people. And it feels like just this amount of usage in AI, stop going from chatbots to like people actually building things. What are you seeing on your end? Because Base 10 really works in the inference space. So do you see when usage sort of takes off?
Yeah, for sure. Look, we are indexed to the fastest growing AI applications fastest growing AI application companies. So when usage goes up, inference obviously goes up. Along with it, inference is the process of taking a model and actually running it into production. And what that means is taking a user input and turning into those outputs. So when you go to ChatGPT and type something in, when you see a bunch of outputs, there's a bunch of inference happening. And so when models pick up usage, when AI applications start to take off, that's when we start to see a lot of usage. And, over the last year, I think I was on with you when the DeepSeek announcement came on almost a year ago. But since then, I think we've seen around like 100x inference growth.
Wow.
And, a lot of that's just been driven by increased adoption by users and developers.
Right. Okay, so there's increased adoption, right? People are signing up, like average people are using AI mode and Google, and they're signing up for ChatGPT accounts. But just the beginning of this year, it feels like another kind. Like, granted, I'm an early adopter, and so is Jasmine. We're trying out all these tools, but it feels like you need so much more compute to spin up an AI coded app or AI in Excel, et cetera, et cetera. So have you seen even a difference over the last few weeks?
Yeah, 100%. So like, I think there's kind of like two separate exponents that are kind of multiplying against each other. So one is just greater adoption of AI in general, which we already covered. And I think the other one is, these models are thinking and reasoning more. And I think thinking and reasoning models just mean more compute. And I guess there's a third one too, which is agentic applications, which require a lot more inference because a lot more back and forth between the application and the model. And when you have all three of those things happening together, what you do end up with is more inference, and what more inference inevitably leads to in a world of bigger models is more compute. And that's exactly the trend we are seeing.
So who's paying for all of this compute? I know I have my, Anthropic Claude Max subscription. I think that's what it's called. I'm paying for a few other things, but it feels like it doesn't even begin to cover all the things that I'm, even just me alone, that is quite rudimentary that I'm doing. So who's paying for this huge step up?
Well, look, I think it's users and developers, right? So I think developers are paying for them in the application, developers are paying for inference of the applications they are building. And, ideally they're passing those costs on to users. But, I think that's what the real beauty here is that, we're also getting better, more efficient at running these models. And so, yes, we're spending a lot more on compute, but there's also significantly more value being delivered than I think the incremental step up on compute. So ideally, end users are paying for it, but hopefully they're getting a bit more bang for their buck as developers get better at using these models.
Right. But for power users, it seems unlikely that $100 a month subscription can even cover it. And I guess I'm sure you've been seeing or hearing this as well. There's this argument that, maybe the VCs and the strategics, because they're in this sort of winner take all, let's get AI out there, that they're paying for it. The VC dollars. Totally. I lived through the Uber and the Lyft and the DoorDash and all the gig economy era, where so much of it was subsidized by VC dollars. And not only do you have VCs in this space, but you have the mega caps, you have just huge funds as well. So how much is that, do you think?
Look, is there a bit of subsidization going on? For sure. I think, but that's just the beginning of what I think is a big boom, and the value is going to get captured along the way. I do think a lot of these companies actually have pretty solid financials. I think if you look at even Anthropic, I think they posted recently that, or it was reported that they were going to have lower gross margin than they initially expected for the year, but it's still quite positive. It's not as negative. I know there has been somewhat about there being a lot of applications around it that are running, maybe selling $1 for 90 cents. But I do think what you will see, at least what we see, is that the value being delivered on the other end. I can talk about some of our customers here, like Open Evidence or a Bridge. The amount of value being delivered in the healthcare process by these models is huge, and there is like a positive, accretive value story here. And I think same with developers. Think about how much. Yes, you're right. Like your $100 subscription a month is only going to capture so much. At the same time, I feel like most people we are paying a lot more than that for our coding agents that we use, and that's hopefully because we're getting a lot more productivity out of it.
Versus an enterprise.
Yeah, exactly.
You're saying enterprises are actually paying up for it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sort of the race and where it's being fought right now. It feels like coding has become the new sort of benchmark. Is coding now the clear signal of who is winning in AI?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think coding is just is such like a verifiable task that it's easy to see value. I think it's the first place we're seeing mass value. I also think it's Anthropic and OpenAI and even all these Chinese models that are coming out have spent a lot of time optimizing for these models. So I think it is a interesting battleground to see where everyone stands today.
Right. And it's kind of creating the difference between agents, right? Which is what it feels like we've been promised for so long. And they're actually doing things this year, to my pleasant surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, for
sure.
Ahead. Yeah. No. I think that's 100% right. Sorry, go ahead.
You go to it.
I'm fine. Okay.
Okay, let's move the there's a bit of a leg. Let's move to the Chinese models because this is a key part of it. If coding is sort of where the battleground is right now, I was really surprised to first hear about GPU and then second, like try it out myself and find out that this agent could do largely what I was doing sort of the week before with American tools. When did you first hear of the company? Is it a bigger deal than some of the other ones that we've heard of, like a Minimax or a DeepSeek or a Quen?
Yeah, I think it's a big deal in the sense that now we have 4 separate Chinese companies that are producing models that can be used in real world tasks. And so like that's QN, you talked about that. It's Kimi, is GLM, is DeepSeek, it's Minimax 5, not even 4. And so GLM has, really taken everyone by storm over the last few months. I think we first heard about it, mid to late last year with 4.5, and then 4.6 came out, and then 4.7 very recently. And what we are finding with GLM in particular is that it is very, very, very cost efficient. It's really, really good at tool calling, and honestly, like it's doing very well in the benchmarks. And of course, it's open source, which just gives developers a lot of options. And so, I think a lot of the story is, yes, these coding models are getting very good from an open source perspective. I think a secondary or more interesting story might just be the fact that there's 5 alternatives coming out of China that are all open source that are somewhat competitive with these closed source American models.
When you say somewhat competitive, I mean, I've seen you look at the benchmarks and they're like right there, right? And that gap is becoming smaller and shorter.
I think on their, to be very objective here, on their raw ability, there is a gap still, but it is smaller. It is smaller every month. And I think, if you think about what they are capable of, it's probably not what 5.2 or 4.5 is capable of right now, but it's probably a few months behind. And that's pretty amazing. Even just that is amazing as an open source solution as a base model. Of course, when you start to think about what you can do once you fine tune these models, you really start to close that gap even more. And so I don't think anyone can look at the current state of affairs and not see, project a year forward and be like, oh, I can see where this is going.
Where's it going?
I mean, I think they're gonna eclipse that gap, and I think you're gonna have open source. Options which are as good as closed source options, within days or even at the same time.
Is that going to be from China? It feels like, a little bit in Europe, but the Chinese seem to be way ahead on open source. What's the US doing to compete in that area?
I mean, look, there's been a few different things, right? So, obviously GPT OSS came out halfway of maybe fall last year. I think NVIDIA just made that large investment in Reflection and Mistral as well. So I think there is signs of progress, and we're very excited by those companies. But also, you can't understate how good these Chinese models have been. And again, you said something earlier in your opening around, was this just a blip with DeepSeek? It is clearly not a blip if there's 5 separate options today.
Right. But you and I are going to get some mail on that point for saying that. NVIDIA bulls don't like it. There's a lot of folks on Wall Street who still say that, and reporters too, who still say that it was a blip. They say that, it hasn't really made the inroads. I've seen, just like you have, the leaderboards. I've seen the adoption globally. But why do you think there is this pushback here in the US? Actually, you don't even really see it. I feel like the government, Washington, has maybe a better hold, but on Wall Street, there's really this inclination to see it as a blip.
Yeah, I think there just might be a lag in understanding of what these models are capable of. I think, we have talked to many enterprises over the last 3, 6, 12 months that are using these models in production. I don't think that was the case 12 months ago. So I don't think it's a blip, and I think it just might not be I think there might be a bit of a who's willing to talk about it. I think there might be a little bit of a marketing delay, but it is, it is not a blip. Well, these models are amazing.
Here's the divide that I see. I mean, when I talk to big tech executives, people working in AI, they do seem to shrug off the Chinese models and say, listen, my company wants only Claude or Gemini or GPT. We don't mess with those little models. But when you talk to the startup world that, like you said, have to operate with lower costs, good enough works, right? When do you see that gap narrow and maybe?
Well, I don't think it's about. I think cost is one thing, and I don't disagree. Like that's a huge thing. I think the other piece, which is like we're not talking about, is the fact that is like control as well. So you can deploy these models yourselves inside your own premise. You can fine tune them. You can optimize them in different ways. So I think it goes, and like that's actually where we see a lot of enterprise interest in these models is, hey, can we deploy this within our own VPCs? And can we not leak any data to any third party?
Right.
And I think that's where these models actually get very exciting. I don't think it's just, hey, they are cheaper to run. I think they are better, more customizable at times, and you have a lot more control as well. And I think that's very important to the startups who are trying to make businesses and trying to make specialized tools for their customers. And I think it's really important for enterprises alike.
Are they as secure? That's something that constantly gets brought up. And not just in the sense, like it's open source, so you're hosting it on a server over here, not necessarily giving China your information, although that is maybe a misunderstanding and a worry. Are they as secure as some of the other models? Do they have as robust like cybersecurity controls and protections?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen any research to suggest otherwise. I think a lot of this stuff is still we're figuring it all out, but I don't think there's been some things about censorship, but people talk about how you can fine tune that out as well. I think there was like a couple of companies that release open source models there, but I think also it's as much about the playbook as it is about the models themselves. And what I mean by that is, you can, in a year's time, I do think there'll be US alternatives here for these models, whether that comes from Reflection or companies like Reflection. And so we just need to get good at running these. And I think that's why companies like Base 10 exist. It's so that we can help those folks run these models in production. So one, they have other options to close models, but two, when they are viable US alternatives, you can plug those into production as well.
Right. There's a question in the chat right now. Is there a Meg 7 equivalent in China? It used to be a long time ago when I was reporting, there used to be the bats, remember? Baidu and Alibaba, Tencent, Sina.
Yeah.
I don't know how closely you follow the Chinese markets, but what would you say now is the equivalent? I mean, are they even fully public, right? You have sort of like the dragons and the tigers and the hardware space and the AI space. How do you see that landscape?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar, with the Chinese ecosystem, so I don't want to speak out of turn here. But look, I could say there are amazing companies, and if you just look at QN, which is coming out of Alibaba, Alibaba is obviously a major player here. And then, as you said earlier, with Zipu going public, DeepSeek's an important company. There are multiple players making moves there, building really great models that are a big part of the ecosystem today.
Right. What kind of enterprises are you seeing use Chinese open source models? Do they necessarily know that they are using Chinese open source models, or is it being served through like middlemen companies?
No. I don't think any U.S. enterprises are running these off servers in China, but I think they are deploying a lot of these models inside their own VPCs, and I think that is probably way more common than we expect.
Right. Actually, this is a good question in the chat as well on YouTube, and please keep them coming. What chips is Jifu AI using? I love this question because they actually said, I don't think it was GLM 4.7, but there was a multimodal model that they said was trained entirely on Huawei chips. Do you believe that? Is that a big deal?
I think, look, there are some, obviously we do a lot of work with NVIDIA, but there are kind of great chips across the board. And I do believe that. I don't think we should think that these can only be done in the ways that we know how to do them. I think, even if you look at folks running stuff on TPUs and AMD and whatnot. We're seeing that here, so it's kind of weird to expect that it's not happening elsewhere.
Well, it's great to get you on this before I let you go too. And is what are you seeing? Because you obviously operate in the inference world, which is like just exploding right now. What does that look like for NVIDIA, who you just received investment from? When there's TPUs, there's AMD, there's China trying to catch up on the hardware front. What does the next year look like in hardware?
Yeah, look, I think NVIDIA is obviously an amazing company, and they've built generations and generations of chips, and obviously CUDA is so important to run these models. They made the acquisition of Grok recently. We've worked with NVIDIA for almost 5 years now. They've been great partners, and for us, investment from them is just like a way to deepen that partnership. I think over the next 12 months, I think you'll see a lot more things around, inference specialized work. I think whether that comes from the existing players or new players, I think it'll be a bit of both. But I do think that, to support all the demands of the application layer, you're going to need, kind of diversification at every step. That's your clouds, that's your models, and that's kind of like the fine-tune RL stuff. That's why it's good that there are so many models, and also from a chip perspective. And you see that in NVIDIA, right? With, they've got all the different generations. I think they just announced another generation this morning. I think, they also, the recent acquisition of Grok shows that they are starting to think about LPU type architectures. And I think that will just become the next version of the chips.
Now, obviously, the data center AI infrastructure build out here in the US, it's in the trillions of dollars, right? 1.4 trillion for OpenAI alone. We see all the big tech companies spending just tens of billions of dollars on this. And I always try to square this with what we're seeing in China as well. And maybe we'll use this to put a cap on the conversation. When you look at how much US companies are spending on the AI infra build out versus what the Chinese are spending so much less. And we talked about this with the models. They're just more efficient. They cost less to train. How do I make sense of that? Does that mean that they're just building in different ways? How can the US build out cost so much more if it does?
I mean, I think you got to remember that we're also serving a global market from the US. And so I think, yes, the models might be more efficient, but we're also using those models ourselves. And, we are serving, Europe and Australia, and in a lot of ways, everything's way beyond the US. I think it's also just a sign of how, excited we are about the potential of AI and how big it will be. And I think how big, a lot of this build out is to support inference. And that goes along with a lot of stuff we believe, which is like, this is just the biggest market that will ever exist. And, it is weird to think that the value delivered here isn't 10 or 100x or 1,000x 5 years from now. Like there's just so much value to deliver.
I mean, it's been such an exciting start to the year. Just personally, being able to see what you can do now feels like it's really shifting from just like talking to your AI to having it build for you. So I'm excited to see what you guys do at Base 10. I'm sure there's lots more news coming. Tuan, thank you so much for making the time to chat with us. Good nuanced conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Deirdre.
Okay, we'll talk to you again soon. And for those that tuned in and asked questions, thank you so much. We'll continue to do these live streams on all things AI that need some more time and need to be broken down. So hopefully see you guys again soon. Take care.